Okay, everybody, you know what time it is. It's FranchisOR Bust. I'm your host, Trevor. Katie, riding shotgun as always. And today we are super excited because, I'm a big fan of alliteration. I love giving people nicknames. I don't have to do it this time. He comes ready-made with one. John Francis, better known as Johnny Franchise, is here with us. John, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. Expectations may be high with your last nickname being Franchise itself. The authority is here with us. So,
yeah.
But fortunately, sometimes the credentials match the name. So, Johnny, if you wouldn't mind letting us know just a little bit about you, your background in franchising, and then we're going to get into all kind of fun topics that people can really learn from you about.
Sure. Great. Well, happy to share. So I'm a lucky kid. I actually grew up in a franchise, literally. My dad was a barber cutting hair in Minneapolis here in the 50s. And we're pretty sure he was the first one to franchise barber shops in the 60s before I was even born. He had multi-units and was expanding. And someone said, "Why don't you franchise?" He said, "What's that?" And at the time, there were hotels and restaurants and gas stations. That was about it. And so he franchised barbershops in the 60s. And long story short, it worked. And he was a classic entrepreneur, a wild entrepreneur, actually. So by the time I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so by the time I was growing up, the business was already going. It was well beyond the startup phase, and things were already going. I thought everything was a franchise. I thought everybody worked for themselves, except the people that worked for us. And I thought everybody owned 2 or 3 businesses. I mean, that's just what I grew up with. So I grew up in that environment of a fantastic entrepreneur and the franchising environment. I learned a lot about hair salons. I learned a lot about franchise industry. We also had a distribution company. We also had a real estate company. I mean, we had all kinds of, like I said, he didn't say no to anything. He was kind of, almost to a fault, right? He just would go in all these directions at the same time. But I grew up in that environment and really enjoyed it and understood and learned a lot, had a lot of opportunity to work really hard early on. And I guess I developed a reputation. My first nickname was the cleanup kid, right? Because I would kind of follow my dad and put structure to the chaos that he would create. And I got good at defining expectations, writing things down, and clarifying agreements, and putting structure to that insanity. And it was a great environment. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and we had a lot of fun doing it as well. My dad was a super nice guy and really did it right. And took a lot of people with him into success. He created a platform for success that really didn't exist in the salon industry back in those days. So again, growing up, I got through high school, got into college, and realized that, of course, not everything is a franchise and not everything should be a franchise. And our company grew and expanded. We added different brands. We had hair salons in different segments of the marketplace. So we had the original brand was called The Barbers, which was kind of full service men's barbershop. Then they expanded to hairstyling for men and women, which broadened the marketplace. Then they developed a concept in the 80s called cost cutters, which was like quick service, no appointments, a la carte pricing. And then we developed a third brand called City Looks, which was kind of a freshened version of the original concept, high-end, full-service spa, skin, nails, massage, full salon spa concept. Then we did acquisitions. I got to do 4 acquisitions of different brands. I got to do international for 5 years. So I got into all kinds of stuff. And our company, our FranchisOR business was publicly traded. We actually got listed up on NASDAQ back when it was relatively easy to be a public company. My father passed away in 94 from cancer. He was only 60. But he packed a lot into those years and had quite a bit of momentum. My mother took over after my father. She succeeded him as chairman, and we had outside executives and lots of people, lots of salons, and she doubled the size of the company in the last 5 years. Then I had an older brother my only brother was 10 years older. He was a franchisee, and he died in a car accident just a few years after my dad passed. And so one thing led to another. That was sort of the upset to the apple cart. My mother decided she wanted to retire. And so one thing led to another. We wound up selling the whole thing. We sold our business in 1999. So like 24 years ago, we sold the whole thing. We had just over 1,000 stores. And I went with the deal to the buyer was Regis Corporation, which back in those days was the consolidator in the industry. It was a lot different than they are today, but we became their franchise division. So I got to kind of take our company apart and put it back together inside of their larger company. So they had 4,000 salons. We sold them another 1,000, and we became their franchise group. And they went on to acquire and build and develop and really just got crazy big. I left after about 9 months because I didn't own it anymore. I didn't feel the same kind of commitment or passion, and it certainly wasn't the same opportunity. So I left Regis in, I guess it was late 99, early 2000 maybe. And I took some time off. I had a pretty incredible arrangement, severance agreements and things that it was like, wow, I got to help manage this, what our family had big transaction, right? It had a big impact. So I went on to do more franchising as a franchisee, as an area developer, as a multi-unit owner, and then as a franchisor. I got in and out of like 5 more brands since then over the next 10 years. And what I learned is I'm really good at helping brands fix what's broken. And so I'm not a great at startup. That's not my thing. I'm really better at coming into a brand, diagnosing what's really causing whatever the symptoms might be, finding the true problem, and then I can give you 5 ways to solve that problem, and then help them. In some cases, I was a partner or an owner or the operator or the developer. Again, it depends on, and a lot were at the same time. I did a lot of things just had a lot of fun with it. And I grew up going through the IFA. I used to go with my mom and dad, and then I went with just my mom, and they served on the board there. My dad won all the awards. My parents are in the IFA Hall of Fame together as a husband and wife, which is fantastic. And so I stayed there, and I showed up as a franchisee and went through those chairs in the franchisee forum. And then I served on the IFA board myself twice in the 90s. And then I sold my last operating company in 2011. That was kind of the last time I really had any employees. And so for the last 12 years or so, I've been sort of a freestyle, a consultant. I used to call myself a reluctant consultant because I really didn't want to do the work. I just want to help other people do their work. And then in the last few years, I would say the word consultant has kind of changed meaning in the franchise industry. And so I don't really use that word anymore to explain what I do. Now I'm more of an advisor, a coach, an occasional speaker. I serve on a number of boards. I work with brands and individuals and executives. I try to help where I think I can, and otherwise I get out of the way. I have just myself. I don't have a team full of people. I don't have an office I'm trying to fill. I just like to do my thing and try to make a difference. And I just love what I do. They say if you love what you do, it's never work. So it really doesn't feel like a lot of work. But lately, I guess the last few years, I've tried to stay focused on being valuable and not busy. And that's my challenge, is to tell it, because it's fun to be busy. I can pack my calendar like anybody, but being valuable is not the same as being busy. So I'm trying to evolve myself to stay into that valuable mode and not just busy. But I love talking to people about franchising. I've been around it my entire life. I like to say I'm not a know-it-all, but I'm a share-it-all. So I like to share what I know, and I ask good questions, and I can get to the real issues pretty quickly. I can relate to just about anybody and just about any situation around the franchise universe. I've got a great reputation, a huge network, and I'm a lucky guy. I get to do what I want, and I'm making a difference with a lot of different brands, a lot of different organizations, and a lot of different people. So it's very rewarding.
Suffice to say, we've got someone here that knows a little bit about franchising. There's no doubt about that. The cleanup kid, everybody, and he knows what he's talking about. So let's
I'm no kid
let's
anymore,
pull a
but
little bit of let's pull a little of the
yeah,
wisdom out here for a
sure.
minute, and let's why don't we start? Let's kind of start small and go big. So one of the things you mentioned was your because of your expertise and involvement in the franchise world over the many years, you're able to diagnose problems and kind of understand, hey, this is I know where you want to go. Here's what's stopping you from getting there. So in the emerging space, so let's say the emerging franchisor, this emerging franchisor has got 35 units open, several sold, but they're in that stretch zone where they're like, I want to get further along, and they feel
Yeah.
themselves stalling and they feel themselves not hitting those growth metrics that they're looking for. What have you often seen in those early stages as one of the kind of the either one of the key drivers for success or one of the key things that's keeping somebody stuck in kind of that emerging space versus moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a range of things. Obviously, it's never all the same, but oftentimes it's the owner or the founder who can't get out of their own way. Um, there's actually a phenomenon called founder syndrome, and you can look it up. I mean, someone had told me about it. And I said, that's what you call it. I've seen it before, but I didn't know there was actually a definition. And that's really where the founder has too much control, and they're not willing. They don't have or don't trust their team to actually do their jobs. So a lot of times I help with structure and accountability in creating both inside an organization so that the people can do their jobs and feel good about the work that they're doing. And the founder just needs to really provide leadership and accountability. They don't need to have their fingers on every decision that's made. So a lot of times it's that. Other times, I guess I've seen the same outcome with a different cause. Sometimes it's the founder or the CEO totally focused on cash and revenue and profits and their own personal owner's benefit, which is, I'll say, short-sighted to be nice. The franchisor that's truly focused on the franchisee's profitability and success is the one that makes it through that hard part. If your franchisees even sense that you're more focused on extracting another nickel out of every dollar that they touch, and you're focused on your benefit, not their benefit, that's a problem, and it's a structural flaw in the relationship that creates an awful lot of problems and headaches. And that one's actually harder to solve because you got to change someone's mindset beyond their own sort of ego and greed is the way I define that. And it's a delicate
Mm-hmm.
thing to help somebody recognize that without really making them angry. And but I've done that. I've seen that before. So I mean, those are some of the situations. Other times, I mean, some of the more obvious things is you see people expand too far too fast. I say if you start in Miami, don't go to Seattle and New York and Arizona. The geographical span, people go too far too fast and they lose momentum. They lose their continuity of the brand, and they just can't manage it all. And they get spread out and spend way too much time and money trying to fix those problems, which you could have avoided if you had a strategy from the beginning. So those are kind of three things I see pretty typical with startup or early stage brands. And the way to get to the bottom of that is really do your homework. I read FDDs for fun, right? I mean, I can get through an FDD pretty quick, and that'll tell you quite a bit of what's happening or what's happened. And sometimes you can from that, I guess I'll ask better questions and really get into their history. And then really it's through conversations with the leaders and the team, and then sometimes franchisees to really understand, how you got here, wherever they are, and then how do you think is the best way to get out of here? Because there could be half a dozen different strategies to solve any of those problems, but it really depends on which one is kind of the primary and what kind of resources you're working with. Usually they run out of money, and that's a problem, obviously. And then, but it's relationships. If the relationships are damaged or worse, that can be really difficult to overcome, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if
I
that
think a
answers
lot
your
of like, it's
question.
great.
Sort of thing.
Well, you did because you did that, and I was going to echo that. Yeah, in the beginning, that owner and that founder is so important, and a lot of times, like you said, they can either get in their own way or they're just not paying attention to the fact that franchisees are what's going to drive the revenue ultimately and their growth and their success. I think that's spot on. Let's shift gears then. So we got those emerging folks, some of the help they may need. Um, when we get up into the bigger arena where you've got maybe 1,000 locations or 2,000, here comes
Yeah,
private equity, right? And they buy you up. And then how important is it to maintain some of the culture, and how hard is it to maintain culture inside of a
yeah,
brand once public, going public happens, private equity comes in and
yeah.
happens? Like, what's the struggle there?
Well, there's a big gap there from emerging, first 50 units to 1,000. I mean, that's a huge leap. So there's a
Sure.
lot that happens in between there. But I think culture is a real challenge, and that's really the point of difference for a lot of these brands, because you can have very competitive brands in the same industry, but they perform completely differently. Their concept might look very similar, but the results are completely different. And usually the variable there is the culture, the attitude, the willingness to work extra, to go the distance, to go beyond what's expected. And that comes from culture and relationships. In my world, that's the X factor. A lot of the private equity, well, no, I shouldn't generalize too much, but sometimes private equity will just make a deal based on the numbers, the financials, the due diligence that they can understand, because these guys are smart and capable and they know how to analyze a business. What they don't understand, or I guess it's getting better now because there's been enough of it with enough experience, the relationships and the culture inside that brand is really hard to quantify and hard to measure, but it's an important variable for what happens before, during, and after that transaction. So, in my experience, when a brand is very mature and very large, let's say they're over 1,000 or 1,500 locations, the culture becomes the critical point of difference. Is how are they going to continue to perform? And that's really driven by leadership, by example, by walking the walk, and not just talking about it, but doing it and demonstrating it and reinforcing it at every level inside the organization. And that really drives the hiring and the promotions and the visibility of the work that's being done. It's well beyond the concept and the performance of the economic model. It's more about the people and the way that you do what you do. And I've been lucky to work with some big brands that are good at that, and I've helped some other brands that didn't understand that, but they were willing to make those adjustments, and it takes time. These cultural shifts are not quick or easy. They take a lot of time, and they often involve a lot of different people. Sometimes some people have to go because they just can't get past the history, and that's really difficult work. But I've seen it done, and it certainly can be done. And I think the good news about most franchise brands is they will be around a long time. If they're good and they're competitive, they'll stay good and competitive. And I like to say franchising is like economic Darwinism, right? It's not the biggest that survive; it's the ones that are willing to adapt. So markets change,
Mm-hmm.
competitors change. If you ever go international, I mean, talk about adaptability is so important when you go overseas. So you have to be able to adapt to really survive long term. But then at the same time, some things never change. The core values, the culture, the mission, some of those things really don't change all the way from the beginning through a very large, mature brand. But I think it's people and culture, and leadership is even more important.
Absolutely. Well, and that seems to be even, kind of what you're saying thematically, even from the beginning all the way through, no matter what, that leadership is so super important. You could have some issues at the emerging stage and obviously the importance as you grow. You mentioned a little bit ago about, sort of growing up in the IFA and being around other people in franchising that know things that maybe you don't know and can help you along the way. And now you're in a position where you're helping other people along the way. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of that, especially at the franchisor level. the need and the importance to be active in the community. And I know you yourself have started, a community for the franchisors and a franchisor group. So feel free to talk to us a little bit about ZOR Forum and just the importance that you found over the years of really being integrated with your peer group in the franchise community.
Yeah. Well, I think, I grew up in franchising. So to me, it was always like, this is how everyone does it. And what I realized, other people have explained to me that, most industries don't behave the way franchise industry does, where franchisors will share and talk and really help each other because you don't see them as competitors. I mean, a burger brand and a hair salon are franchisors, and they might have some of the same issues, but they're completely not competitive. So the nature of franchising allows for that collective wisdom and the desire and interest in helping each other, which I took that for granted. That's just how we grew up. That's how everything was done. And that's how we did it in our company. And we did it with a lot of other brands and people around the IFA was the place to go for that. So that's still the case. And I'm very happy to see that and to participate in that. And I think there's just tremendous value in learning from each other. And it's not always obvious in the things that you learn, but it's really the people and the relationships that develop over time that can be really valuable. And that's why I think people are drawn into franchising and then they stay in franchising. They might move around different organizations, but they bring their experience and they bring their relationships along with them. So that's a lot of fun. And I think that's, I don't know, like I said, I take it for granted, but I think a lot of people really appreciate that. What I'm involved with now is a mastermind group is what they're called now. I used to call them peer groups back in the old days, but we have an environment where franchisors come together on a regular basis to really share ideas, share their problems, and then share their solutions and the ideas and the strategies. And, well, this is what I've seen work, or this is what I tried and it didn't work, or, so we get into this exchange of ideas and perspectives and strategies. We do it every month. It's a lot of fun. We do it virtually now, thanks to COVID. I guess everyone's comfortable going online. And so we do that. It's actually a franchise system called ZOR Forum. And I am the first franchisee, which I swore I would never be, but here I am. And I'm loving it, right? It's a lot of fun for me. And basically, it's the work that I already do. And I have done it before in a different concept, another business owner peer group model that I worked with the partner and helped him franchise it. And we sold that business back before the Great Recession. I think we sold that one in 2009. So again, I did a lot of things over the years, but this now has become a focus for me. And it's a lot of fun for me. It's very rewarding. It's actually a way that I can have an impact with more people and more brands, but do it in a more efficient way. Because I wouldn't have the time. There's not enough hours in the day to spend the time I'd like to with all these different brands. This way, when we work together in a group format, it allows me to have a bigger reach and a bigger impact, and it's actually more affordable for those members and those participants. And actually, it's not all about me. Obviously, I do my part and I facilitate the group and I moderate the conversation, but sometimes somebody's issue they bring up and somebody else in the group brings a solution or a perspective that I didn't have, or somebody else. So we learn from each other, even if it's not direct experience. The exposure to that exchange can be very powerful. And then really over time, those groups develop their own trust and their own relationships, and they really bond and connect. And those friendships are valuable for a long time and well beyond the formal group setting. So I'm really excited about that. I've been having fun with that for about the last year or so, and that brand is starting to get some momentum, and we're starting to see some real results. I've got some members that I ask them, well, what do you think? You want to stay with it? It's a month to month kind of commitment, so it's pretty simple, I would say, but it's powerful because the exposure and the solutions that they can get without really any risk. It's a very powerful combination. So I'm having a lot of fun with the ZOR Forum groups.
SOAR Forum is the place that you can go to if you want to reach out to Johnny and you want to not only understand the value he can help bring to you, but also your peer group, and really get a group of people together that have, the ability to help drive your franchise brand forward. It's not often that we get a guest on that has so much experience, but also two really cool nicknames. And that's something that we learned from the Cleanup Kid and from Johnny Franchise. And we appreciate that. And we appreciate you, Johnny. Any last words of wisdom you want to leave our audience with?
Well, franchising is not easy. It's really not easy. And if you're a franchisor, you're going to learn that. If you don't know it yet, you'll learn. You get all of the blame and none of the credit, right? I mean, if something goes wrong, it's your fault. If anything goes right, the franchisees did it. And you have to kind of get past all of that and really have a long view perspective. I see a lot of franchisors, I get around and I'm at these events and I'm doing my part. I see a lot of people get revved up, I'll say, about building and selling and building. And then they just want private equity as soon as they can. And they want to sell their company, get it up and sell it and do another one. And I personally, I'm kind of put off by that. I think that's a missed opportunity. I think the better approach is to be very careful, very purposeful, very intent on picking the right people, not only on your team, but in your brand. I say the first 5 franchisees set the pace for the next 50, and they set the pace for the next 500. So if you can take your time and be very careful and methodical and play a long game perspective in franchising, you'll have the success that you're looking for. But I think a lot of times people get overheated, maybe overexcited, and they just want to build and sell it. And I think that creates a lot more problems than it solves. So I guess my parting advice would be, franchising is not easy. It's an awful lot of work. It's a full-on commitment at a lot of levels. It's probably the hardest thing most people will ever do if you're a franchisor, especially if you're an owner in the franchise system. But if you have a long perspective, long-term, careful, and you're willing to share and learn, and you don't have to solve all the problems yourself. Believe me, there's been hundreds, thousands of brands and tens of thousands of people who have gone through this journey of franchising successfully. And because of the culture in the industry of willingness to share and give back, I think there's just a tremendous opportunity for people to get it right, but you have to have that right mindset from the very beginning. That's my advice.
There you heard it, folks. Hey, that I would dispute it, but I just can't. It's got to be right. You heard it from the man himself. If you're looking to franchise and you're looking to succeed and you don't want to have a bust, you guys got all the great info from Johnny Franchise, and you can learn more from him. Go check out SOAR Forum to see if that would be something that could interest you and help your brand. Johnny, it's been a real privilege for us to be able to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate it, and really just glad to be here. Thank you again.
All right, everybody. Next time on FranchisOR Bust.